Arriving in Israel is always a blessing. And what a blessing it is for myself and 57 others to be here at this time and once again enjoy the state of Israel. As many times as I've been here, it never ceases to be a joy and a thrill to return. And every time that I come, I encounter something new. I don't suppose that it's possible for anyone to ever just come and cover all of the historical, biblical, and godly places that there are within this very small country. As you know, Israel is not all that large a country, about 300 miles north and south, and at its widest point, only 98 miles wide. So Israel really isn't that large. You think about that, 300 miles from north to south. Well, those of us who are accustomed to living in Houston and going to Dallas every once in a while, if we drive about 245 miles just between cities and think very little of it. And yet Israel is not much longer than the distance between Dallas and Houston. Oh, it's closer to being the distance between Houston and Fort Worth. And you can think of cities in your state that are maybe 300 miles apart, and you'll have some idea then as to the length of the state of Israel. And then only 98 miles at its widest point? Well, my friends, you can travel that in just a little while. Yet when one goes to Israel, you spend days and days and days traveling and seeing the sights, becoming a part of what is there for you to behold, and it takes all of your time. In fact, after you've been there for 11, 12, 13 days and you're ready to leave, you have discovered there's a great many things you haven't seen, a great many things that have not been done. So here I am in Israel again, and I've been coming to Israel now since 1973, and what a joy it is to be back. From my post of observation, I'm sitting in the King David Hotel, one of the most beautiful hotels and fine hotels in all of Israel, and my room affords me a magnificent view. Now, I'm really not just doing this to tease you or as a part of propaganda at all. Believe me, it is an absolutely magnificent view that I'm afforded. I'm looking out over a gorgeous, gorgeous garden area behind the hotel, and over the Henna Valley that joins itself to the Kidron Valley that separates the old city of Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. And I see very well all of the major points of importance of the old city of Jerusalem. The dome of the Mosque of Omar, also referred to as the Dome of the Rock, the silver dome of the mosque that is used by the Arabs in worship every day, the Tower of David, the walls of the city. I'm looking right over at the Jaffa Gate, and what a magnificent view it affords me. Well, as I examine my thoughts for just a moment, this ancient city of Jerusalem, been there quite a while now. You'll remember that David purchased this piece of land for the express purpose of having a temple built there, and his son Solomon built that temple, and Jerusalem came into existence as the capital of Israel. Hadn't always been Israel's capital, but from that time until now, it is the capital of Israel. In spite of the fact that there are still many nations of the world that refuse to recognize that the city of Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, it nevertheless is the capital. In fact, I just might add that our own nation, the United States, does not recognize the city of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. They recognize Tel Aviv. And you might want to inquire of your president as to when we're going to get smart and recognize facts and go ahead and stop being political with the city of Jerusalem and give our support for it as the capital of the nation of Israel. Well, it's a gorgeous view. It's a gorgeous view both during the day, as it is right now, and also at night. You can look out my hotel window at night toward the city, and I want you to know it is just absolutely magnificent. And I suppose that one of the most beautiful views in all the world is to be looking out over the city of Jerusalem on a moonlit night. And we're going to have one of those coming up right away. The moon is filling out quite nicely, and before we leave here, it'll be a full moon, and we'll have the opportunity of gazing at the old city of Jerusalem from the King David Hotel in the new city of Jerusalem on a night in which the moon itself illuminates all of that historical and magnificent area that holds so many truths for Jews and Christians all around the world. Well, what a joy it is, and I want to go back now and give you a little briefing on our trip thus far. We didn't immediately come here to the city of Jerusalem and to our hotel. We arrived a few days ago in Tel Aviv at Ben Gurion Airport. We're hurried right through the airport, as is our case always, by the Ministry of Tourism and by the members of Uzi Verid's company. We work with Verid Travel and Tours, and Uzi and his people always do an excellent job for us. And, of course, it has been so this time. In fact, we've been privileged to have Uzi guiding for us. He is an excellent guide, one of Israel's finest, but since he is the company owner and does not guide much anymore, we are just very privileged to have had him guide us in the first 6 days of this exciting tour. Well, as I've said, it's always a joy and a delight to be here, and when you're flying into Ben Gurion Airport at Tel Aviv, you're looking out the window of your plane, if you're sitting by a window, and you're seeing the magnificent city of Tel Aviv beneath you, and then you start into your landing pattern at Ben Gurion Airport, and you're waiting for the wheels to touch down. Let me tell you, it's a strange thing. Every time the wheels touch down, you suddenly have that feeling, well, I'm home now, and I can get off the plane and go about the things that I have come here to do. And you really have that feeling. I mentioned this to one of the leaders of the government here in Israel, and he said, well, you ought to feel like you're at home. All of your roots are here. And the beginning of your spiritual life is right here. And I thought, well, for an Israeli and one who does not know the Messiah yet, you're really on target. And so it's a delight to tell you that when you come to Israel, and for you that are listening to this tape that have perhaps been there several times yourself, you will know exactly what I'm saying. You do immediately feel like you're at home. The first night that we were here, we spent it at the Dan Acadia Hotel, right on the Mediterranean Sea, just north of the city of Tel Aviv. A very beautiful resort hotel, and I'm not exaggerating in the least when I say that. Gorgeous gardens of all around the pool area, heavily hung with bougainvillea in full bloom, and then looking out toward the very picturesque and magnificent Mediterranean Sea. I wish we'd had more time there, just the very first night, and then up the next morning to begin our touring of the sites here in Israel. But with such a marvelous resort area, really it would be good to be able to come over here and just stay a few days right there and relax and enjoy that magnificent scene. And so we, the second morning, got our bags outside, and they tell a lot of stories about your traveling in Israel. Your bags are outside of the door so that the porters can pick them up and load them on the buses, and then you're on the bus, and you're off the bus, and you're on the bus, and you're off the bus. But you're just absolutely attaining a marvelous warehouse full of information. Now, you've read about all of these historical and biblical sites from the Bible, but suddenly you're standing on them. From our hotel that morning, we began our tour in the scenic areas of Mount Carmel. And believe me, Mount Carmel is a beautiful, beautiful mountain. You remember from 1 Kings chapter 18 that this is the mountain on which the prophet Elijah called for a contest between himself and the prophets of Baal, who were the prophets of Jezebel, who at that time was the wife of King Ahab of Israel. And they were going to determine whose God was really God, by which one was able to answer with fire and consume a sacrifice off on an altar. I shall not go into the details of the story, but it was on this very mountain that event took place. And of course, you will recall that the god of the prophets of Baal and Jezebel's prophets could absolutely do nothing at all. But when Elijah, after giving them plenty of opportunity, reconstructed the altar, put his bullock upon it, and saturated it with 12 barrels of water, and then prayed a very brief prayer, and the God of Elijah, the God of heaven, answered by sending supernatural fire, which consumed the sacrifice and the wood and the rocks, and licked up the water that was in the ditch. And the Scriptures tell us that 20,000 Israelis turned their hearts back to God, and they took all of the prophets of Jezebel down into the groves, that's the river bottom, and slew them every one. And it was a great day of victory for God within the camp of Israel. Well, it's a marvelous thing to have the opportunity of driving along through Mount Carmel. Finally, as you're approaching the head or the lower parts of that mountain and the city of Haifa, you come by the magnificent University of Haifa that sits right on the top of the mountain. And then you go down through winding streets into the city of Haifa itself. Haifa is a magnificent city. It sits on 3 levels. There's the level that's along the dock and wharf area, and then there's a secondary level, and then the level up at the top of the mountain itself. In Haifa, we were staying at a hotel situated right on top of the mountain and overlooking perhaps the most beautiful scenic view of the city of Haifa that can be had. It's just absolutely breathtaking from that particular point of observation. We had an opportunity to have an excellent night there in the hotel. Many of the folks that evening went down and rode the subway. If you were not aware of the fact that there's a subway in Haifa, and I suppose it's the only city in the Middle East that has a subway, but it does. It's an underground subway that runs from the top of the mountain all the way down to the lower level. So makes about 7 or 8 stops on the way down and on the way back, and it's on an incline all the way, and then coming up on the way back. It was a marvelous treat for some to get to do that. And if you ever go to Haifa, you might want to keep in mind there's a subway there, and if you have the opportunity, you might want to ride the subway. The next day in Haifa, we had the opportunity of eating on downtown eating places right on the sidewalk, where you can just get a tremendous variety of food. But the most popular thing is the falafel. It's made out of pita bread, or as some of you call it, pocket bread, and the falafel is made out of chickpeas. Chickpeas are taken and soaked in water until they swell, and then they're permitted to dry, and then they're crushed, and then lots of different spices are added into it, and they're deep fried, and that's stuffed into your pita bread or your pocket bread with lettuce and tomatoes and other vegetables, and then you can add whatever other seasonings you want, such as salad dressings, hot or otherwise, to it. And I'll tell you, it is a delightful treat. It's purely a Jewish dish, and to eat it right downtown like that, and of course wash it down with what do you think? An American Coca-Cola. What a delightful experience it was. As the group went on with their sightseeing, I had an appointment in Haifa with Dr. Reuben Heck. Dr. Reuben Heck is one of the chief advisors to the Prime Minister, and I had been able to get an appointment with him. I thought surely that I'd be courteously received and perhaps have 30 or 40 minutes with this very important man, and extremely busy man, because he runs one of the most important and largest industries, privately owned industries, I might add, within the state of Israel. And this is the huge grain silos at the port of Haifa. And they're building a second one just exactly like it at the deep sea port of Ashdod. So I didn't expect to have nearly as much time with Dr. Hecht as I did. In fact, he gave me the whole morning. I arrived a little before 9:30, and just a little before noon I excused myself. He didn't bring the meeting to an end. I just simply had to be at another place, and I excused myself by letting him know that I was sure he had many other things to do. Early in the beginning of our conversation in his office there in the complex at Haifa, phone calls were coming in from all over Europe through his private lines. His secretaries were running in and out, and finally he began to realize that I had something to say and something that he wanted to hear. So he told his secretaries not to disturb us and that he would not receive telephone calls from anyone until our conversation had come to an end. We had a marvelous conversation. When you consider that this man is a top Israeli, a great patriot, and one of the chief advisors to the Prime Minister, then to spend that much time with him and to have his attention for that long, you have to understand that God has to arrange these things, especially when he is as busy as he was on that particular day. In the course of our conversation, we talked about many things pertaining to Israel, and how that the prophetic scriptures written by the Hebrew prophets thousands of years ago backed up those particular points that we were mentioning. He made a statement to me, and he said to me, as you know, we now have a Bible-believing prime minister. Now, he's speaking of Menachem Begin. Not that other prime ministers before Mr. Begin had not been aware of many things within the Scripture, but Prime Minister Begin is perhaps the first prime minister that has really studied the Old Testament Scriptures and is fully aware of the prophecies of the Old Testament. And so Dr. Heck wanted me to understand that he and many, many others were very pleased with the fact that they now had a prime minister who was Bible-oriented and who believed those things that were set forth within the Scripture pertaining to the nation of Israel. As our conversation began to come to its end, I said to him, before I take leave of you today, there are 3 prophecies that I must point out to you. Perhaps you are already aware of them, but they have to do with the nation of Lebanon. Of course, many of you have heard me speak concerning the nation of Lebanon and the prophecies that come out of Isaiah chapters 35 and 60, and then from verse 20 in the book of Obadiah. I'm not aware, or was not aware, that Dr. Heck at that time knew of those particular references. But I could tell that his interest was extremely keen, as I pointed out to him from Isaiah chapter 35 and verse 2, that the prophet declared that the glory of Lebanon would be given to Israel, and then from chapter 60 and verse 13, that the glory of Lebanon would be given to Israel, a reiteration of that statement. And then from Obadiah verse 20, that the people of Israel, no longer captives, would push north unto Zarephath and possess the land. And of course, the city of Zarephath, as many of you have heard me describe, is in the Sidon district. It is just south of the city of Sidon, which is just south of Beirut. Were you to leave Beirut on the coastal highway and drive due south, you'd come a few kilometers and be in Sidon. Continuing on just a few more kilometers, and you would be in the city of Zarephath. It's a smaller city that sits right on the Mediterranean coast on the north banks of the Litani River. Were you to draw a line east and west from Zarephath to the borders of Syria, all of the land south of that would be the lands that God has said through the prophet Obadiah that should be possessed by the nation of Israel. Well, when you look at the position of the tribes of Israel in ancient times, you'll discover that they did possess that land. So for Obadiah, during the time of Israel's captivity, to point out that they would possess it again should not seem strange, but it belongs to the nation of Lebanon, and yet God has said that Israel is going to possess it. And not possess the land of Lebanon, but possess that part of the land of Lebanon. The interest of Mr. Heck was most pleasing to me, and I'm sure that he reminded the Prime Minister of those very things. While I was visiting with Mr. Heck, our group was touring up to the good fence on the border with Lebanon, where they were able to observe Lebanese people going back and forth from Lebanon into Israel, and the good rapport that the Lebanese have with all of the Israeli troops that are stationed along the border there, and the heavy activity in the exchange of commerce and other things that go on there. Lebanese coming into Israel for hospitalization and medical help, as well as the many of them that work in Israel and return home in Lebanon every night. It's a good relationship, regardless of what the American news may be telling you. It's a good relationship. It still is to this very day, has been for a long time. From that spot, our group went on to the border with Syria, overlooking the city of Quneitra. There was a tremendous battle around the city of Quneitra during the Six-Day War when Israel took the Golan Heights from the nation of Syria. Quneitra was supposed to have been reoccupied by the Syrians, but they never did so. Right near Quneitra was the general headquarters of the Syrian army in the Golan, and that a building that has been bombed and hit by artillery fire is still standing. But our group was permitted, we got special permission for our group to go into an Israeli military stronghold, right down into the entrenchments and underground bunkers, and it was quite a thrill for them. I'm sorry that I missed it, but I felt like that my meeting with Dr. Heck was more important than my going into the Golan, where I have been on many occasions, but I would have enjoyed going through that particular military stronghold. Everyone felt like it was a real highlight, and they got to enjoy the beauty and the magnificence of the Golan Heights and the city of Caesarea. Now, you know, there's Caesarea by the sea, which is just north of the city of Tel Aviv, but the true Caesarea Philippi, is up in the mountains, which is part of the Golan Heights. And it is there that the part of the headwaters of the Jordan River that flows into the Sea of Galilee began. And those headwaters come right out of the side of the mountain. In fact, if you can get over close enough to the side of that mountain without getting all wet, you can drink the water coming right out of the mountain. It is so pure. So they thoroughly enjoyed that particular trip that day. It is always gorgeous, very, very beautiful, and one getting into that area can see why that the Israelis must control the Golan Heights and must never relinquish it again to Syria, because it is a strategic military point. Now, as long as the Syrians had it, they fired at will with their artillery down upon the agricultural communities within the northern Galilee area. Now, the Israelis have held it since 1967, and not once have they opened fire from that area into Syria, unless they were attacked, as was the case in October of 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. So the Israelis have not taken advantage of that military position to fire on the Syrians at will, as was the case when the Syrians held it. So the Israelis are doing good for evil. Well, we, coming down from the Golan, arrived at the kibbutz, where we were to spend the next 2 nights. Kibbutz Nof Gennesar, sitting right on the banks of the Sea of Galilee. Now, folks, the Sea of Galilee is a lake. For those of you that have not been there, when you think of sea, we usually think of the Mediterranean Sea or the Aegean Sea, or one of the others that you've studied about in history. The Sea of Galilee isn't in that category. It's really not a sea. It's just a lake. It's only about 14 miles long, 6 miles wide, and about 150 feet deep. So you can see that's a good-sized lake, but there are many, many lakes that are much larger. In fact, we've got some great lakes, Lake Superior, for instance, that's as large or larger than the entire state of Israel. So here is the Sea of Galilee, the freshwater source for the entire nation of Israel. In fact, the Sea of Galilee is fed by the River Jordan. And the River Jordan at its widest won't get much more than 20 to 30 feet wide. At its very widest, that's as wide as it is. It's like a good-sized creek in the state of Texas or a good many other states. But it's the River Jordan, and it feeds the Sea of Galilee, and it keeps it full because of the large amount of snows that collect on Mount Hermon and then melt and run down to supply the River Jordan and the Sea of Galilee, that from it the nation of Israel may draw its major source of water for its domestic uses and also for its agricultural needs. As you know, most of the crops in Israel are irrigated, and most of that water comes right out of the Sea of Galilee. Well, I just want to tell you that staying at Nofgenesar, right on the sea, is a very delightful experience. It's a very lovely kibbutz. They have marvelous guest quarters. In fact, their new guest quarters give them accommodations that are rated 4-star. The food is excellent. The people are friendly and warm, and you're just right there on the sea. By the way, the weather has been excellent. Just absolutely beautiful. Nice and warm during the day, but not overly so, and cool in the evenings to where it's very, very comfortable. However, the evenings here in Jerusalem, where I am at this present time, have become quite cool. In fact, you really need a coat or a wrap if you go out to be comfortable. But the weather has been delightful. They told us that Israel had 6 snows this past winter. That's absolutely unheard of. 6 snows this past winter. And, of course, that just supplies them with a great deal more moisture, and it meant that their crops got off to a good early start, and their crops this year are, in all parts of Israel, are going to be absolute bumper crops. Of course, they've had a lot of rain. The week before we arrived, they had a saturating rain that just covered the entire state of Israel here in the month of May. Now, my friends, you've got to understand that God is smiling on the nation of Israel. No wonder God said to Abram, "Abram, they that bless you, I will bless." If he's blessing the new nation of Israel and its people as much as he is with all the problems that they have, then he's keeping his word to Abraham. And since he's keeping his word to Abraham, that means he's going to keep his word to the nations that bless the nation of Israel and the people of Israel. So what a delightful bit of information to know that Israel had so many snows this past winter and such good rains, as well as a magnificent supply of snow still on the top of Mount Hermon, causing them to know that they've got more than an ample water supply for the next several years if it didn't rain anymore at all. But it's going to. One of the things that causes rain is increasing the trees, and I'll have something to say about that in just a little while. Well, while we were at Kibbutz Nofgenesar, the Feast of Pentecost rolled around, and it was our good fortune to get to celebrate the Feast of Pentecost with not the people at Nofgenesar, but a very young and new kibbutz up in the hills away from the Sea of Galilee. And what a blessed time it was. And as you take the time now to turn this tape over to the other side, then I want to share with you our experience of celebrating the Feast of Pentecost with the people at that kibbutz. We boarded our buses from our kibbutz at Nofgenesar to go up to the new kibbutz that's operated by about 50 young couples and then a few singles, both girls and boys, many of them in the military but making their home there. And they just simply went into the hills and cleared out the rocks and took hold of the acreage that was there and created a very, very lovely kibbutz. The Feast of Pentecost is the Feast of First Fruits. Now, when I say first fruits, immediately you're going to have a better understanding of Pentecost than you've ever had before. for people who, like most of us that are listening to this tape, and for me, for us, Pentecost is related to an experience with the Holy Spirit. But that experience with the Holy Spirit came on the Jewish feast day of Pentecost. The word Pentecost really doesn't have anything to do with the baptism in the Holy Spirit, with the exception that God brought about that experience for the very first time in relationship to the New Testament church as first fruits to what was to come. But the Feast of Pentecost is really the feast where the Israelis would bring the tithe off of their produce into the priest and the Levites. Now, the Israelis were tithers. You just did not find any that weren't. It was something that great emphasis was placed upon. The first fruits belong to God. And this word Pentecost then is associated with first fruits. It really isn't associated with our New Testament experience of being baptized in the Holy Spirit, except, and let me reemphasize this, except that God brought that experience about as strong evidence of His first fruits as to what was to come after that initial 120 were so filled on that Jewish feast day more than 1900 years ago. The Jews in Israel to this very day still celebrate Pentecost. The first fruits of all of their crops are turned over to the JNF. That's the Jewish National Fund. They in turn then can sell all that is brought into them and converted into funds for the continual reclaiming of lands and creating more agricultural communities, that the nation of Israel may continue to be the breadbasket that it has become. So at this particular kibbutz, they had a parade. Their floats, they made them out of tractors and wagons. They paraded their children on bicycles and tricycles with colored papers and that sort of thing. It was just very, very lovely. And then they began to bring samples of their fruits, their produce, their chickens, and everything that they built there, including some plastics. They had a plastics plant there, and they even brought a supply of that and presented it laid it on a platform. And this was their way of expressing that we still keep the Feast of Pentecost. We still bring the first fruits in, and as I pointed out, the first fruits belong to the JNF. In the days of Israel, when they had a priesthood and the Levites, then the first fruits were brought in for the support of all of the ministry and the support of the temple. And since they do not have that at this time, they still, however, maintain this particular celebration. Knowing that we were going to be coming to this kibbutz and that it was a young kibbutz and it was made up of young couples and they had a lot of children, we bought a lot of baby strollers and baby toys and toys that can be played with for water sports like water slides and floats and then dolls and smaller toys and candies and gum. I think we brought over about 8 large cartons of that material to take up to that kibbutz and offer it along with their offers of Pentecost. We just took it up and laid it on the platform as well, and they gave me an opportunity during their celebration to greet the folks there. And it was quite a delight and a joy to be involved with that particular celebration. Now, you're going to be able to pick up on Israel celebrating the Feast of Pentecost, the Feast of First Fruits, by reading Exodus chapter 23 and Leviticus chapter 23. In both of those chapters, Exodus 23, Leviticus 23, you're going to be able to get some biblical information on first fruits. And you will remember that our Lord Jesus taught us to bring in our first fruits on the first day of the week. And so we too ought to be tithers. We ought to be tithers. If you're not tithing, you're not only robbing God, but you're cheating yourself. You're cheating yourself of multiplied blessings. I tell you, I've said a lot about tithing over the last 18 months, and I'm not going to stop, because I don't believe that we can be genuine Word people and faith people and true Bible believers until we are tithers, until we recognize that a tenth of all belongs to God, and we are willing to bring that tenth in and turn it over to God. So let me exhort you to be a tither. If you're already a tither, then use this material to exhort others to tithe. God will bless you abundantly. I've even known sinners that have tithed, and God's blessing was upon their businesses or their monies simply because they were tithers. I've heard folks say, I can't afford to tithe. No, you can't afford not to tithe. Everyone must be a tither. And I'll tell you, as quickly as all of God's people get to tithing, we'll see that all of the financial problems that so many churches have had and so many organizations like our own have had, thank the Lord for His blessings upon us financially. And I'll just take the moment to say we appreciate your financial support. We really do. God love you for it. But there have been so many outreaches that have had serious financial problems. But if all of God's people were tithers, none of that would be, you see. There's just more than ample money coming in through the tithe, or there would be more than ample money coming in through the tithe if every believer tithe. But we did a survey last year, 1981, and found out that only about 1/3 of all the people in our churches tithe. If the other 2/3 would tithe, my, it would release twice as much money into the kingdom of God as what is coming in right now. And what we couldn't do, or what we could do, let me rephrase it, what we could do with that kind of financial support. Well, it was a delightful experience. We returned back to Nafghanistan for our last evening there, and then the next morning began our very scenic tour down the Jordan Valley from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea and Mount Masada and on into the city of Arad. But the Jordan Valley just holds so much in the way of scenes. You're driving, as you're going down south through the Jordan Valley, you're going through Samaria and Judea. Now this is the area. Samaria and Judea is the area that the United Nothing, and by now you all know that I use that in the place of the United Nations, but the United Nothing calls that the West Bank, and they say that it's got to be given back to Jordan. And that includes all of the area of Samaria and Judea. And so we drove through Samaria and on in through Judea, and just saw one magnificent sight after another where the Israelis have gone into those areas and created agricultural communities. Now that's a kibbutz, and I want you to know they have not put up temporary buildings. Everything that they're doing is being done after a fashion to let everybody know they are there to stay. They have no intention of returning Samaria and Judea, and as the political world calls it, the West Bank, back to Jordan. And the thing that is so amazing that as you drive south through the Jordan Valley, you just go through one Arab settlement after another. And you'll see the old homes in those communities and the new homes. In fact, most of the old homes are no longer occupied because all of the Arabs have built for themselves brand new homes. And they're nice homes. They're fine homes. They're well-equipped homes. In fact, you almost have to see them to believe them. They're not anything to compare with the old homes that they had that almost look like adobe huts. Now, those of us from the Southwest know what adobe huts are. And this is very similar to a lot of the old Arab homes. But those communities of the Arabs in the Jordan Valley have become extremely profitable. The Jews have taught them and shared with them the same agricultural techniques that they use. And the Arabs still own their lands. Those lands have not been taken away from them, as you so often hear people saying. They just simply have not. If there were any lands that were confiscated by Israel, those lands have either been paid for, or if the owners want them back, in some cases they can even get them back. But many of the Arabs still own their lands, and using the agricultural techniques that the Israelis are using, their lands are just as productive as any other lands over there, and because of that, they're making more money than they have ever made before. New homes, and oh, by the way, on the top of every one of those homes, a fine television antenna. They all have television. And besides that, all of the homes in Israel, including the Arabs' homes have solar systems. Their water is heated by capturing the heat from the sun. Sitting around all of those homes were automobiles, and oftentimes, believe it or not, it was a Mercedes. I wonder if you have a Mercedes parked at your house. And tractors, all of the tractors and farm machinery that they need to get the job done that they have to do, are sitting around the homes so that they're not out there doing it like they did it 6,000 years ago with an old horse or an oxen pulling a wooden plow, but they're doing it in the most modern fashion. Also, in every one of those Arab communities, there are schools for the children and health care for the children, something the Arabs never have had before. I don't know why. I started to say, I don't know why they're complaining. Really, they aren't complaining. The complaints are not coming from those Arabs. It's coming from others, and many of them that do not even live in Israel. And you get among the Arabs that live there, and they really never have had it so good. So they have schools, they have medical attention, and believe it or not, there are no Arab refugee camps in Israel. As we were riding along, one of the ladies that was in our group, who used to be a member of my church when she and her husband lived here in the city of Houston, and he managed one of the fine hotels in the area. And he has now passed on, and she's living in Arizona. But she went with us on this trip, and she had not talked to me about this matter, but I overheard her asking Uzi, where are the concentration camps in which the Arabs are being held? And it really surprised him. I think he thought that everybody knew that Israel wasn't so unjust nor cruel. And he said to her, why, we don't have any. She said, well, we see them ever so often on television in America. And I then had to get into the conversation. I had to say, yes, you do. The American news media, it seems, is doing everything it can to discredit the nation of Israel, and most of the time doing it very dishonestly. There are no concentration camps in the state of Israel in which Arabs are being held against their will, not any at all. Now, we did get to the city of Jericho coming down through the Jordan Valley, and near the city of Jericho there was a large Arab community that was just basically adobe huts, as one would describe them, and no running water, no electricity, no modern sewage facilities whatsoever. And, of course, this area is completely evacuated. There are no Arabs living in it at all now. And when we arrived there, we pointed it out to the dear lady with us and said, could this be what you have seen on television? She said, yes, that's it. So American newsmen continue to pull from their files film clips of this particular area near the city of Jericho and say, look at the horrible conditions being enforced on the Arabs in this area. Well, it just really isn't so, and all one needs to do is to go over and see for himself, or you may take my word on this particular matter. But I'd rather for you to just go with us the next time we go and see it for yourselves. We continued on to the Dead Sea, stopped at the Dead Sea for those that wanted to take a splash in the sea. You know, the salt content is so high you cannot sink. You can float in the Dead Sea. You cannot sink at all. There were those that wanted to take a swim, and they have fine facilities where we stop so that you can bathe afterward and change clothes. And those of us that didn't get down into the very salty water enjoyed sitting in the shade and having a nice frozen yogurt. And the yogurt in Israel is very, very good. Well, if it's a land that flows with milk and honey, why shouldn't they also have yogurt and a lot of other good things? We proceeded on from that spot to Masada. As you know, there's been much said about Masada in recent years. Movies made, television movies made. Masada is to the nation of Israel what the Alamo is to the state of Texas, Valley Forge to the War of Independence, and many other historical sites throughout our country and other countries. It's where the Jewish zealots held out against the Roman soldiers for more than 3 years, and the Romans had to build a dirt ramp up the backside in order to finally conquer that mountain. And when they arrived on the top, all of its inhabitants had slain one another, and the last committed suicide to give the Romans absolutely no victory whatsoever, not any at all. From Mount Masada, we drove on into the lovely mountain city of Arad. Now, Arad has a climate much like many areas that you'll find out in Arizona and other places where people who have various and sundry physical problems, lung diseases, bronchial problems and such, asthma and such, would go there to live. In fact, they really created this community for that express purpose. It was quite small. It was more then of a medical community than anything else. But the people that began to go out there found the climate so delightful, and they were talented people with abilities of one sort after another, one craft after another, and out of it came the city of Arad, quite a lovely city, growing quite rapidly, and just an enjoyable one to see. We drove all around through the city the next day on our way to Beersheba, one of the ancient home sites of Abraham, the father of Israel. Beersheba has become the fourth largest city in the state of Israel. There is Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, and then Beersheba. The population of Beersheba now approaching, if I recall, something in excess of 100,000, and just growing very, very rapidly. Again, it's down in the desert area, the Negev, and has a marvelous climate, and tremendous industry has been drawn into that area, and a large university is there, quite a large university. I think the enrollment at that university now is something in the neighborhood of 12 to 15,000. From Beersheba, we went out to the Lahav Desert, which lies to the northwest of the city of Beersheba. And the reason we went out to the Lahav Desert is because that's where the Mission to America Forest is going to be. You say, I thought you had a forest. No, we don't have a forest until we have 10,000 trees in it. And so it is the site of the future Mission to America Forest. We now have several thousand trees in it, and we're very anxious to get the forest completed. And any of you that are listening to this tape, you want to take on a small project to help us complete our forest. The trees cost $6 a piece, and You can just take the time to get with a Sunday school class or a church and just get it together, and then send it into our offices here to say, add this many trees, and we'll see to it that you get a lovely certificate back that you can frame and mount to let folks know that you have trees planted in Israel. They may be a part of the Mission to America Forest, but they'll be in your name. We'll be pleased to help you do that. So we're anxious to get the Mission to America Forest completed just as quickly as we can. We've been working on it now for 5 years, adding trees along every year. And I'm waiting now for the JNF to tell me how many trees we now have in our forest. But I had a chance to stand by one that we planted the very first time 5 years ago, and it's just a little bit taller than my head, about 6.5, 7 feet tall, the tree. And so we planted a great many more this last time. And we're just pleased to be able to do this. Now, I said earlier in this tape, when we were talking about the weather and the increased amount of rain and that sort of thing that Israel is having, that I'd mentioned something about trees. As you know, or maybe you have forgotten from your studies in school, but trees help increase rainfall. And the more trees that are planted in Israel, the more rain they're going to have. And this has already been the case. I don't know what the exact figure is because I've had several different figures. I'm sure that I can get a fairly accurate one, but at the present time there have been somewhere between 150 to 200 million trees planted in Israel since they became a state in 1948. You recall that it was a very heavily forested lands before that it was swept into captivity, and then all of its captors stripped it from its forest, one way or another, until the whole nation of Israel was without any trees. Now that permitted the topsoils to erode away, and Israel was reduced from a land that flowed with milk and honey to malaria-filled swamps and sand dunes. Well, once again, the Israelis are planting trees just as rapidly as they can, and they will just gladly receive the help of any that want to do that. And we at Mission to America some 5 years ago decided one of the things that we want to do in Israel, we're doing a number of things there, but one of the things we wanted to do was to create a forest. And so it is in the making. And we'd love to have you assist us in bringing that forest to its completion right away. And at the same time, then, we're going to be causing there to be more rain for the state of Israel, and the forest create lovely areas of recreation for the people of Israel. And I just wanted to call that to your attention. Then from there, we started our way toward the city of Jerusalem, and we drove through the Elah Valley. And the Elah Valley is the site of David's victory over Goliath. I think you're going to find this in 1 Samuel chapter 18, along in that area of 1 Samuel. And you can read of the victory of David over Goliath. And there's a brook that flows through the Elah Valley. And the bus always stops, and everybody piles off the bus to collect a few smooth rocks out of the brook from which David collected his, with which one of those he slew Goliath. We always kid every group and tell them to look carefully as they're selecting rocks, because the one that finds the rock that slew Goliath will get a special prize. Never figured out what that prize would be, but nevertheless, it makes it all the more interesting, and people carry back pounds of rocks from the state of Israel. But they've got a huge supply over there, so they're not likely to run short anytime soon. But it's another lovely experience to stand approximately in the site where David won his marvelous victory over Goliath, and the armies of Israel, strapped on their armor, raced upon the field of battle and slew the Philistines to the setting of the sun. We arrived in Jerusalem in time to get to our hotels, check in, and then go to the western wall of the temple area, because it was along about 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday. And you know that Shabbat begins at the setting of the sun on Friday. which on this occasion was a little past 6 in the evening, and it was quite cool, and we watched some of the celebration of the beginning of Shabbat. I want you to know that the Western Wall area gets packed with Israelis as the evening goes on. More and more and more come pouring in to pray. Now, most of these are Orthodox Israelis. You will find some who are not Orthodox, but for the most part, those that are there are. And, of course, those that are of the ultra-Orthodox community also come to celebrate Shabbat and beginning and enter into worship. It's a marvelous experience. I've never failed to sense the presence of the Lord there. It's grand and glorious. The yeshiva students come dancing into the area, singing unto the Lord, and I'll tell you, sometimes the glory of God just gets over your head around that area. God still has His eye upon the people of Israel, and He has His eye upon the Temple Mount, and it is still very, very important to them. Well, another sight that impressed me as we were touring around the city of Jerusalem again is the fact that for years now I have been telling you about the construction of the great synagogue on King George Street, right in the heart of downtown Jerusalem. This synagogue began to be constructed in 1975 and was finally finished and dedicated in August of 1982. Took them 7 years. That's a significant number, isn't it? And we have watched that construction go on from the time of the foundation and basements and then the superstructure beginning to go up. And I've reported it to you on numerous occasions and written about it in our newsletter update. But the great synagogue, they're not calling it a temple because they say we're not ready for temple worship, but they are calling it the great synagogue. It's the first central house of worship in Israel since the destruction of the synagogue in 70 A.D. by the Romans. It is absolutely magnificent. Our entire group was afforded a special tour throughout the synagogue. I want you to know they just opened it all up to us and took us through it as though we really were excited about it. And the truth of the matter is, we were. On the lower floor, there are 1,000 seats, and the men sit on the lower floor. The ladies all sit in the balcony, and there are 700 seats in the balcony. As you know, all Israeli weddings or Jewish weddings have to be done under the stars. So in the roof of this magnificent building, they have constructed an area that with the push of a button, that part of the roof will roll back so that while the wedding is going on, you can look right up and see the stars at night. They just haven't left anything out of it. It is magnificently done. It was extremely expensive, but the state of Israel did not put $1 into it. It all came from donations. I am convinced that this is the building that not only is going to serve as the central house of worship for Israel, which it has already begun to do, but it is the building from which the Antichrist will attempt to carry out his evil assignment beginning at the midpoint of that 7-year period we have called the tribulation. Well, while in Jerusalem, I had the opportunity of sitting with several more of the leading diplomats of the state of Israel. One of them, none other than our dear friend Itzhak Lior, who was the diplomat who paved the way for us to have the Ezekiel Files world premiere in Jerusalem back in 1978. He is now one of the chief negotiators for Israel with Lebanon. And I had the opportunity of pointing out to him the same passages of Scripture that I had pointed out to Mr. Reuben Heck concerning Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon. And I pointed it out to Itzhak in the Hebrew Bible that was there in the hotel. While he was reading it, his wife spoke up and he said, "Well, Itzhak, what does it say?" And he said, "It says exactly what Hilton says, only it is stronger. We must possess the southern part of Lebanon." Well, That information then went right away in the next 2 or 3 days to the negotiators through Mr. Itzhak Lior. You know, your trips to Israel always run out. You're always looking forward to the next one. And my tape has run out, and there's so much more I could tell you. All I can say is, plan now to go to Israel with us next June. It is going to be very exciting. Write my office, and they'll send you information. What a delight to report to you from Jerusalem, Israel.